Hello and welcome back to the TorontoWebsiteDeveloper.com. I am Peter Yorski, the Toronto website developer specializing in Drupal. And in this second video tutorial on PHP for Drupal, I'm going to walk you through some comments, some common structures for PHP scripts, and then more importantly, we're going to look at variables. Now, just like any other video tutorial, again, a big favor to ask before we get started. If this video tutorial helps you, please leave me a comment and let me know. I always appreciate that feedback. And again, if it did help you, give it a thumbs up. Those two things are very small things that you can do to help me promote these videos and keep them coming and keep them free. Now, with that, in the previous video tutorial, you should hopefully have your WAMP server installed and you should have gotten Eclipse and be ready and roaring to go. You'll see here I've got a new PHP script, tutorial2.php, and I've placed it in YT.php. That's going to be my site. I'm going to use that when I'm logging onto my local host. So you'll see here I was doing a little bit of work before this video tutorial. Actually, this is, I don't want to tell you how many times I've tried to record this video tutorial without screwing up. But yeah, this is take, maybe, let's say 3 or 4. So let's get started. I'm going to go back into my Eclipse editor here, and I'm in tutorial 2. And what I'd like to do is walk you through comments. So essentially what comments are, they're plain language, I guess statements you can add to your code that explain what your code's doing. And the reason why you want to do this is because you can have this whole huge complex code and come back in a day, 2 days, weeks, months, years, not have any idea what the code is actually doing or why you did certain things. And comments help with that. And so additionally, a lot of time when you're writing code, and if it's open source and you're sharing it like Drupal is, other people are going to be looking at that code, and having comments really helps speed up that process to understand what's going on. So example comment here, you can add a hashtag, shift3, and then this will never show. I could also do double slashes, and this will also never show. These are both single line comments. If I go down to the next line and I type something, you'll see here this shows up in black, whereas this is green. That's Eclipse telling me that my comment isn't carrying over to a new line. So if I save this and I go back over to my browser here, reload this, I'm going to get an error. If I take this out, save this, go back to my browser, reload this page, I get nothing, no output, and that's the beauty of comments. Next type of comment you can do, multi-line comment. You're gonna slash asterisk here, and then when you press enter, you'll see that Eclipse actually closes the comment for you and takes you down to a new line. And so I can type in, this is my multi-line comment. Save this, and it's all green. Eclipse is telling me that's all one comment. Last type of comment you'll commonly see is called a doc block. And what that is it's 2 asterisks to begin, and then when you press enter, it closes off. And this is actually in a blue text from Eclipse. And again, I can have my comment. This is a comment. This is a special type of comment. What you end up having is another PHP script that can be run on your code, and it will look for all of these doc blocks, pull it into code reference material, code documentation, so that users can come along and read about what you're doing. You typically have these with objects and functions, which we'll be talking about later in the video tutorial series, and it'll denote what the function does or what the object does and that kind of thing. And there are different special tags that you can use in these. Again, don't worry too much about this, but you can use @param to denote parameters for the function if you're working with that, or object or whatever. And you can find these all in like Wikipedia or a quick search to find out what all of these different tags are. But again, don't worry, it's probably way past the scope of this video tutorial, only being our second in this series. So now if I went ahead and I saved all of this and I reload my page, again, you'll notice I get nothing. That's because comments are overlooked by PHP. It sees what comment, the denoting here, the 2 slashes, the hashtag, that kind of thing, and then just ignores them all, and then continues to look for code. So those are comments. Other thing I wanted to flag here is, you see I've got these line breaks between everything. PHP doesn't care about white space between its tags, right? So I can create a whole bunch of space here and just go print hello, save that, and then if I go over here and I reload, you'll see it just shows up the first line, right? Doesn't really matter where I put that. With that, the neat thing is you can tab and indent, and you'll see that a lot in PHP. It's definitely a best practice. You want to indent all of your code, and the reason why you do that is because it's easier to read. So you'll see here when I press tab, I actually get 2 spaces. That's Drupal coding convention. So if you're watching these video tutorials for Drupal, you want to set that up, and you can do a quick Google search for Drupal coding standards to understand what's going on if you're going to be sharing your code back. The other thing here, I'll give you an example. If statement is a specific statement, it's called a conditional in PHP, and we're going to be touching on that later in the series. But I would typically indent here, and then I would have do something. And this is a whole lot easier to read if I had just compared to me just having it all against the no indentations here. Once this gets really long, you're not going to have any idea what's going on. So that's why you want to indent and take advantage of that white space. The other thing to note, just before we start looking at variables, is you'll see here at the end of my expression here, I added this semicolon. You have to do that in PHP. Anytime you have an expression or you're doing something as a line, you have to end it with a semicolon, and that tells PHP that the line is ending. You'll notice other programming languages like Ruby are a little bit more loose on their syntax, and you don't have to do that. But PHP you definitely do, and you'll see if I don't add that and then I go on and I do something, PHP immediately tells me Eclipse tells me I've got this syntax error, and that's because I haven't ended the line. And so then it looks at it and says, oh, okay, your syntax is great, because you generally are great, Pete. So now let's take a look at variables. Variables can be a little bit complex to get your head around. Essentially what they are placeholders that you can use in your code. And the reason why they are so helpful is because they could be essentially anything, right? We can put a whole bunch of different things in variables. There are a whole bunch of different kinds of variables, and PHP is pretty cool in that you don't have to explicitly tell PHP what your variable is going to hold. That's kind of nice. That's a looser syntax compared to other programming languages where you have to say, like in Java, you have to tell it, okay, this is going to be an integer, and that's what this variable is going to hold. We don't have to do that in PHP. So what we can do is to create a variable, you always start with the $sign. $signs denote variables in PHP, and your variable can start with a letter or an underscore. That's it. You have to start with either of those two. It can't be a number. You'll get an error. You'll see here if I go 9, I'm getting this error here. But if I remove that, I don't. And so that's my my variable, and I've got my variable name here. And this can be all capitals, but typically you don't do that. Capitals are reserved for certain things in PHP, so don't do that. But what you could do is what's called camel case. So we'll have var, and we'll call this Pete, right? If you're doing this with Drupal, typically we don't use camel case. They use underscores, so you have var Pete that way. But again, either way, if you're not doing this for Drupal, you're doing it for something else. You just want to check the coding standards on whichever you're working with, unless you're developing your own stuff, and then don't worry about it, go buck wild. So that's how we declare a variable. So we'll call var here, and I'll end that with a semicolon. And if I save this and I run this in my browser, you'll see that I get no error. It's fine. That's legal. If I go ahead and I try to print var, PHP actually doesn't know what var is, so I get this notice that I've got this undefined variable. So that's a bit of a problem. So typically what you'll want to do, and again, it's entirely up to you, you don't have to, but you want to give it anytime you're declaring a variable, you want to give it a value. So let's give this value 2, and then we'll go print var. I've got my semicolons in there, and so if I reload this, you'll see that I get 2. And you'll notice that I gave var a value using this equal sign. That's how you assign values in PHP, is the equal sign, and then whatever your value is going to be, and then semicolon and that. So that's how variables are created. The reason why they're important, again, because they can hold anything, and essentially they're what make your web page dynamic. So you could have a variable for the current date, call a function that returns that date, and then pass it in to a string. So you never have to go into your website every day and type in today's date is whatever. You can just have a string that says today's date is, print the variable. The variable always pulls in the date from their server, and then you're good to go, right? Save a huge time saver. So that's why variables are cool. A whole bunch of different variables. I'll run them all off and walk through them, right? So you can have integers, doubles, Booleans, you can have nulls, you can have strings, arrays, objects, resources. And the arrays, objects, and resources are a little bit different. We'll be talking about those later, more in depth. But in terms of integers, this is an integer, right? So integer is a whole number. So, well, not a whole number, but no decimal places, right? Because whole number is specifically something. If for all you mathematical nerds out there, So integer. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 100, your integer. There's a maximum value for an integer. Don't worry about it. I don't think you'll ever get to it if we're talking about basic PHP scripts here. If I'm just introducing you to PHP, I don't think you're going to be doing something that's too earth-shattering that you're going to run into that issue. Doubles, essentially once you start adding in your decimals, you're talking about doubles. Interesting thing about PHP is PHP will only print the number of decimal places that are needed to print the number. So if I did, plus, like, I don't know, 4.1 or something. I don't know, bad example. Because that's going to print out a whole bunch of stuff. Anyways, what's a good example here? Let's do plus. Let's do 0.01. Save this. And then if I reload this, you'll see it's printing out 3, right? But here I had 2.99 and 0.01, so I had 2 decimal places, but it didn't print any. And that's because PHP will just print as much as it needs to. So 3.0 gets printed out as 3. So that's a good thing to note in case you're wondering why that is. The way around that is to format the number when you're printing it. Again, it's a bit beyond the scope of this video tutorial, but just do a quick Google search if for some reason you want to do that right away, right now. You'd format that number and tell it how many decimal places to add. So those are doubles. Booleans are essentially, if you've ever heard of binary, 0 and 1s, essentially Booleans are similar. Boolean is either true or it's false. So there are a bunch of different reasons why you would want a Boolean. An example here, if you're talking about Facebook, let's say, and you want to know if Sam is my friend, right? If Sam is my friend, it's true. If he's not, it's false, right? So that's a good example of a Boolean. So you can use those for conditional statements, if true, if false. In terms of null, null is one of the ones I mentioned. Null can only be null, right? And essentially what it means is it's almost like not set, right? It doesn't exist really. So you can have something as null, and there are various reasons why you might want to have something as null. But null will always return as false if you're checking, to see if it actually exists, right? It doesn't exist, so it's null. So that's null. Again, we'll be walking through a lot of this stuff throughout the entire video tutorial series. So if this is all kind of weird, don't worry about it. I'm just trying to get you through it now so you have an idea what variables are, how we can use them. So the other variable that we're going to talk about here, because we're not going to talk about arrays, objects, and resources, but you can have a string, right? So if I, let's create a variable here called string, and let's type this as, this is my string, right? This is it. This variable is now my string. So string is essentially, text, right? And this could have been created with single or double quotes. There are different reasons why you want to do that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But now if I go ahead and I print string, save that, it's going to actually print out, this is my string, right? So in terms of single quotes, double quotes, they're a little bit tricky. And the best way to do that is I'm going to show you, or best way to explain why is with an example. So I'm just going to copy some text here from tutorialspoint.com. And let's go ahead and print this. I'm going to add some spacing so we can actually see what's going on here. And I'm going to take these /ns out. Those are a PHP thing, but the browser is not going to help us here anyways because they're HTML related. So let's go ahead and save that. Added in BRs to denote line breaks. And then if I reload this, you'll see here my $ variable will not print. My name will print. And if I look at the script, variable is name. And literal single quote, there's no processing of the string. It's just printed out exactly as it is, right? So $ variable actually shows up in the string. With double quotes, it gets interpreted, and so $ variable gets replaced with the actual text name. So in Drupal, you typically do not do this. I'm not sure about WordPress and whether or not you want to do that. It's entirely up to you. I typically always use the single quotes, and the way that Drupal works is it goes like this. So print, this is my, and then you close that, and you concatenate it, the string, and I'll explain what that is, a variable, and then end that off. And so this period, when you're working with strings, it concatenates two things together. So it will treat this as one string together, and it'll print it out on one line. So let's go ahead and save this, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I reload this, and you'll say, this is my name. right? And so this is the way that I operate Drupal coding conventions to do this. It's entirely up to you. This just kind of gets a little bit ugly and can be hard to maintain, I guess, when you have a whole bunch of text. So that's why you do that. The other thing to note before we conclude, because this is pretty much essentially where I want to stop, there are two functions that I want to show you. And these, they could be going over the top, but once you start printing things out, I want to make sure that you don't set yourself up to get screwed over by hackers. And the way they can do that is what's called, I guess it's cross-site scripting, right? And so let's take an example, and let's get rid of all of this. And there are certain tags that you don't want to be printed because the browser will interpret them as you doing something. So this is something you don't want to see. And then I'm going to add in a script, right? And this tag script, just as I just said, is a special tag that browsers will look at, and it typically denotes that JavaScript is coming, right? And so I want to print this out. You don't want to see script. And if I go and actually print this, this is something you don't want to see, and it doesn't print, right? Browser doesn't print script, and that's because the browser thinks that I am sending it a command to enter in script. And so if an end user on your website did that, this is a great way they could hack into your site. And so what you want to do is you want to get rid of that. So if you're actually trying to print this out and you want to see this script with those special characters, what you're going to do is you're going to put HTML special cars, and then you're going to add in these brackets. You're going to save this, and then you're going to reload this page, right? And now you'll see that this is the script. So HTML special cars is a PHP function. I know I haven't explained what functions are. If you've got any programming experience, you'll know what I'm talking about. And you'll see these special brackets. That's because functions have brackets, and then you're passing something in. So you pass in a string to special chars, and then it will make sure that it will print out as it's supposed to print out. What's called escaping the brackets here, the script. So that's why we're seeing it. So just trust me on that. I want to introduce you to that in case you're trying to print something out and you don't want to get screwed over by hackers. The other thing is you can go strip tags. This is another thing you do if you don't want users to be able to enter anything like that. And then you reload, and again, you don't see it because what strip tags does, it's a function, and it actually removes this. So rather than printing it, it actually takes it all out. So that's what strip tags does, and again, it's a function. So I know we covered a lot. Hopefully this isn't too confusing. If you do have any questions, leave a comment. I do monitor those comments pretty closely. And again, thumbs up if this video tutorial helped you. Hopefully we didn't go too fast, but I did want to get past the basics so we can start doing some cool things in the next video tutorial, which we'll look at operators. So again, thumbs up, comment, and hopefully we'll see you for the next video tutorial. Thanks very much.